So in this video we're going to put together a basic rig using Harmony Premium. So right now if we look at what's here, we'll see that we have a bunch of layers, and the layers are all of the artwork. They're not in any particular good order, kind of messed up. So we're going to organize this and make this into a simple rigged character. So to accomplish that, we're going to switch over to the node view. So now if I click on the node view, the window is not very big. Now, a couple options. If I have a secondary display, I could open up this window in its own display. But while we're doing this, because the layers have all been named for the different body parts, so we have our front foot, our front lower leg, front upper leg, hips, torso, neck, head, back ear, front ear. So we have B and F. So we use back and front so that as we start building a rotation or 360 rig, we can use that kind of language with it. So right now it's set up so items on the left side of the figure are considered front, on the right side are going to be considered back. So to organize this in our node view, what we want to do is make our node window bigger. To accomplish that, while the window is my active window, so we see the frame around the window, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control F. So Mac Command, Windows Control, and I hit that once. That full screens my application. Now I need to make sure that the window is still the active window, and if I hit Command F one more time, it's going to now make my node view become everything. Now this is a way to kind of get started with what we have in the node view. I can start moving things around, dragging things around, trying to find, but as you may have noticed, that's a lot of layers. So what I'm going to do is just click on display right here, and I will click on the order node view up, and I'll say OK, and we'll see how now it creates the fan. It spreads everything out. While I'm in the node view, if I hold down the space bar, I can move my layers around, or I can kind of pan around my view. If I use my mouse wheel, I can scroll in and out. Otherwise, 1 and 2 on the keyboard will accomplish the same thing. So now that I have separated everything, one thing that's going to be useful is right now we have all of these pipes, these connections occurring between layers and the composite. So the composite is where things are all joined together, and then display is what shows up inside our camera window. So right now we want to separate these. We're going to organize all of these layers. We're going to add pegs to them. We're going to put in backdrops, get everything configured here in the node view. Then we will go back and start assigning the pivot points and making the character ready to animate. So the first thing that I want to do now that I've moved all my nodes out is I'm going to grab the cutter. Now the cutter up here allows me to just go through and remove all of those connections, because if I leave those there right now, it's just going to get messy and hard to figure out. Now I can turn off the cutter and I can select things again. So I have the head, and then I have a front eye, we have mouth. So there's different ways that people organize their nodes as they set things up, and I'm just trying to make sure I have all of the head pieces. So these are all of my different head nodes, and we're going to organize these and set these up. Now in a more complex rig, the eyes would certainly, each eye would be its own group, because we would have a pupil, we'd have the white of the eye, we would have an upper lid, a lower lid, might even have the eyebrow as part of the group. So you would have a bunch of layers, so each eye would be its own group. But for right now we have a fairly simple character. We have ears, nose, mouth, eyes, and then the head itself. So we have, some simple components there. Now if I look here, these are all back layers, so I can just select those. I'll move these over here. And then we have torso and hip. Whoop, don't want to connect that yet. Torso and hips, that's part of the body. the neck. We'll put all those in one place. And now we have the hand, the lower arm, the upper arm here for our front one and foot. So, I mean, one method that is used sometimes when people organize their nodes is they actually start to almost build kind of a skeleton. So we organize the leg nodes down here, the arm nodes, but right now I'm just organizing them so I can find the different pieces, separating them out so that I'll be able to work with them. With my nodes selected, what I'm going to do is now the horizontal organizer. So we first fan them up. So that was where we did the order nodes up. Now I'm going to click across and we'll see how it organizes them. So we have the foot, the lower leg, the upper leg. So when we do an arm, we'll do the same thing. We'll do hand, lower arm, upper arm, and we span that across. And now with that, I'm just going to adjust these so it will organize it. So having a well-organized node tree is going to be super useful when we are putting together our whole character. So each group that we have here is going to go to its own composite that will kind of group them together. So, or each limb or the head, the torso, it's going to have its own composite. And we will need that when we start doing some more complex things like auto patching or cross-cutting, where we're controlling it so then we can create seamless joints and things along those lines. So to add in more composites, one thing we can do is we could copy paste that node and that works, but we have to be careful. Certain nodes, if we copy paste, can cause problems, because if we just copy paste one of our drawing layers, it's effectively making a clone of it. So it's the same thing just showing up twice in our node tree, which is useful when we're doing effects and other things, but it's problematic if we change one, it changes the other one. So we don't want that to happen. So to add new nodes, the easiest way to do it is we hit return or enter on the keyboard and you start typing in the kind of node you're looking for. So I'd be looking for a composite, and there it is. So we add the first composite. Now this is composite 1. So one thing is within node organization, two nodes can't have the same name, just like two layers can't have the same name. If we actually group these so that they're contained in a group, within that group we can have a node that has the same name as a node in a different group. So there is some overlapping, but not going to worry too much about that right now. So now we'll add a composite there. Now because composites can be safely copy pasted, I can just paste a few extra composites there. I need one for each limb. Now, good practice, I could name each of these composites. So then if I want to name it, in my preferences set it up, if I double click on a node, it pulls up the properties for that node. Otherwise you have to click the yellow box. So that's in your preferences, we can change that. And this would be our back, leg, comp, and close. And this is going to be my back, arm, comp. Now one thing is within the naming, we're not allowed to have spaces. So if I hit the space bar, it automatically puts an underscore. So then that just makes it easy for me. So again, double click. This would be my front, arm, comp. And this would be my front, gotta highlight, front, leg, comp. And close. Notice comps have a slightly darker blue color than drawing layers. So there's a difference. Now you'll notice the two layers over here, they are red. That means those layers have been deactivated. So if I double click on one and look here, so they're disabled. If I click here, it's enabled, it turns blue. So enable, disable, and we can also just with one selected, the letter A and the letter D allow us to very quickly enable and disable layers. So A for, I like to say, activate, and then D for deactivate or disable, because we're not using E and D, so it's A and D for making that happen. Now, to connect my limbs, artwork layers to their comp, an easy way to do that is I select my 3 layers and I hold down Alt or Option and then click on the comp and it connects it. Otherwise, I can drag from the output on each one to connect it. So I find selecting, hold down Option, click, select, hold down Option, click. So that's a very quick and easy way to join those together. Now, when we have our thing, one thing to keep in mind is what's on the left side will be stacked on top. So the foot's on top of the lower leg, it's on top of the upper leg. So that's how this has been organized, and that is a common way of organizing limb parts for cutout character rigs. Now, another thing that we're going to want to add to these different nodes is we need to add in pegs that we will be using for animation, because when we're doing cutout character animation, we don't animate the drawing layer, so we're not actually animating the drawing layer, we're animating through pegs. The drawing layer is just simply the drawing layer. So if I select these 3 layers and want to add in a peg to it, if I hit Command P, we see it, or Control P on Windows, it joins it all to a single one. But if I hold down Shift when I do that, so Command or Control Shift P, we now have individual pegs for each one. Now, part of how we want to set this up is each drawing layer should have its own peg. But if I move the lower leg, I also want to be able to move the foot with it. So that means I now need another peg attached to this. So now I can just, with that peg selected, hit Command P, I get another peg. And now that extends out, and I'm going to then connect that peg to the foot. Then I want, if I, don't want to double click on that. With the upper leg, when I grab the upper leg, I want to be able to move the upper leg, lower leg, and foot. So to accomplish that, I'll do another P, and we're going to rename these so they make a little bit more sense. So this one here, this is the back upper leg, and this is going to be the master peg for the back upper leg, and then this is going to be for the lower. So as long as we have some consistency in our naming sequences, then that's going to work. And now that we have this organized as a group, and we're going to repeat this for the other limbs, what we want to do is select all of these layers, or nodes, because it's layers and pegs, and we go up into our menu up by top, and we'll go down to the bottom where it says Insert, and I'll choose Backdrop. When I insert a backdrop, you can see how it puts this in. Now the cool part about the backdrop is now I just click on the backdrop and I can move this around. Now if I click on something in the backdrop, I can, don't double click, but click and drag it out. It's now click off. We can see how it's not part of the backdrop anymore, so we can move things out of the backdrop. If we drag something into the backdrop, so if I just drag this into the backdrop, click off, click on the backdrop, it's now part of that. So backdrops are pretty flexible that way. As we work with them, we'll pull that back out, don't need it there. Now backdrop, if I click on the yellow box, a couple things about it. One, I can choose a color. Two, I can give it a name. So I'm going to just call this back leg and close. So now we have that item done, and we'll connect that to our main composite here, but we're probably going to then be connecting in some additional pegs because we'll want a lower body peg so we can move the hips and legs as a unit, and then we will have a torso peg, and then we're going to, so as we put this together, we're going to end up with a lot of different pegs, and then we have to set all the pivot points, and then we will be ready to animate. But the first thing is to organize this node view so that it becomes usable. So once again, select my layers, Command or Control Shift P, and then I can just select these next two, Command Shift P, not Command P, and that gives me the pegs that I need for it. And now I just add in the word master. So it's useful to have enough information in it when you look at it. Because, I mean, really this is the back arm master peg. So always dash P so we know it's a peg. So I really don't need the U in it, but I'm just going to leave it because it simplifies the typing. Now, you will notice in the organization here that we have these two pegs stacked up, these two pegs, and they're organized vertically. So we don't have, you know, this over here, and so we don't put that there and we put this here. We don't want that type of organization. We want to be organized in our pegs because we put these two pegs in alignment because they're going to share the same pivot point. So we'll put the pivot point in the same place. So whether I click on the upper leg or I click on the whole leg, it's going to pivot from the same position. Same thing when I click on the lower leg master or the lower leg itself, they should share the same pivot information. And that is why we organize them with a vertical kind of organization. So that is why we use this cascading approach instead of more of a triangular or tree approach. So again, go to my menu, go to Insert, choose Backdrop, and now I can choose a new color for this. I'll just, for my colors, I'm probably just going to start working my way up the list on it. Now backdrops do get to have spaces in their naming. Now, if I put some text here, this is some info. So if I need to put some info about this backdrop and I can close it, we can see how we can add that and it puts extra information in there. So if we want to do that, we certainly can, or we can get rid of it. All right, now let's work on the front one here. So select my layers, Command Shift P, select the next two, Command Shift P, name this master, name the next one master. Now you may notice if you're paying attention that we have position information here, other stuff about this peg. So when we do position the peg, because by default all pegs start out at 0, 0, which is dead center in our camera view. So if we want our pegs to be to share the same information, sometimes we can go into the peg data, copy what's there, go into a different peg, paste information so we can get them to share the same alignment. So I've now selected my layers. Once again, we'll add in another backdrop. This time this is my, I'm going to do a blue for that one, and this is my front leg. Move that down so it doesn't get selected with it. Move these so I have a little more room. Select all three. So you will notice, there's a little bit of rinse and repeat going on here. So we're doing the same thing repetitively. This is part of setting it up. It's possible to actually create a layer and peg, backdrop, everything template where we create a whole project where we have a template file that has everything organized for a standard character. Pivot points aren't set yet, there's no artwork in it, but all the nodes are organized, so all you have to do is start drawing in the artwork and then set all your nodes and you're off to the races. So that can be, as you become more advanced in what you're doing, that sometimes can be an approach that speeds up your workflow if you realize you're doing the same thing over and over. So once again, select my layers, go choose backdrop, and now move this over just so it's not on things. We'll choose the other blue, so we have the two blues, two reds, so it's easy to see fronts and backs. And this would be my front arm. Going to close that. Now, in some of these others, it gets a little less clear as to what is on top, what is on the bottom, how we want to organize it. Oh. So I'm just going to set these here so then I get a nice, it's interesting that it's giving me that extra space that I don't want. Okay, so this will be for my torso, so Command-Control-Shift-P, get those pegs there. So I'm going to need an additional peg that will be my upper body. I'll need one that's my lower body, so we'll add those separately once we kind of get everything connected and figure out the best place for organizing those, because we'll have those kind of super nodes, and then eventually we'll have a master node or master peg for the entire character as part of it. So now we have, that is going to be my body, so we'll just go here, backdrop, make that green, just call this body. So some people like to capitalize everything while they do it, others keep it separate. Now the head is a lot of layers, so we're just going to move that, move this. I'm just trying to organize here. So for simplicity's sake, we'll start out, we'll have the head here, put the front ear, back ear, and then eyes, nose, mouth. Select all of that, organize horizontally. Move those over a little bit. So as you can see, our backdrops don't end up all the same size. You also can grab the corner at the end and make backdrops bigger or smaller as needed. So we'll add pegs to all of these layers here with it. Now the eyes, nose, and mouth typically are going to have another, that is what is considered kind of the face. So I'm going to just add another peg here, and we'll call this one face, because that allows me to move all the facial features, so that moves all of those. So it moves the eyes, the nose, and mouth, so I can just grab that face peg to move that. Ears are always going to be moving kind of independently. We have the head, and then I put those behind so the ears sit behind the head, because currently our artwork is really just a front view. Otherwise we could have the head all the way at the side, and we could nudge those back in space, or have their nodes to the left but then adjust where they are in a composite. So we do have different options as we work with that. So we'll just add in now, with nothing selected, if I hit Command P, you can see I get a peg here. And then this will be my head master. And now with the head master, just going to drag all of these points over to it. I think I'll give the head its own comp here, so I can just hit return. It remembers the last one you selected will always be at the top of the list, so I'll just have that. It gives me a composite. Remember, if I highlight all of the layers, hold down Alt or Option, click on the composite, it joins them to it. So it's much faster than dragging it all out. And also remember, using the scissors or cutter, I can just cut them all very quickly. Turn off cutter, select, and then Alt or Option, click on my node, select all of that fun, click over here, insert, backdrop, and now I'm going to choose kind of this yellowish color, head, close that out. So I realized I neglected while I was doing the body. I forgot to add a few more items to it. We'll just put those over there. We'll make this a little bit bigger. You can select these within it. So as you can see, we can move things around. So the torso is going to have an additional peg on it. This peg is going to be my upper body peg, or it can be an upper body master, but it really is just kind of an upper body peg. And the hips are going to have a lower body peg. Now, to be consistent, we'll put a space in there. So we have our upper body peg, lower body peg that will share the same pivot information as the torso, as well as the lower body on that. So now we kind of have things, we have a start to our organization. And what we're going to do is start connecting all of these parts together and dragging or connecting them into the main composite. So we may end up wanting a composite for the full body depending on how it comes together. With our core backdrops organized, now we're going to start setting this up. So I'm going to really have to zoom out so we can get things organized here. So we'll start with our head, then our body, and then we can either do both front pieces, but it's very common to have the arms together and then the legs together as part of this. When we have our main composite, this is my scene composite here, our character is going to end up with its own composite, so we'll have a composite there. We could, to keep things really simple as we look at this, we could set up and have a composite for the body, but right now if we're looking at in that character composite, so if I just hit return or enter, this is now my character composite here, we can drag the head down to it. As we can see, we don't have that many things that we're going to drag down to it, but now if I drag over a front arm, back arm, my front leg, and my back leg. We'll worry about the body in a minute. If I exit my full screen here, one will notice we don't see anything yet because we haven't connected our character composite to our scene composite. And then once we do that, we don't see anything yet because my playback head was at frame 60. So we put it back at frame 1. You see all of the layers and their pegs showed up. We can see how we have the organized. We have the upper leg master, lower leg, foot. So we can see how we have our different peg organization happening with it. We just don't have a body showing up yet. So as you can see, by connecting everything, we are getting much closer. We need to put the body in, and then we can start to see a little bit of how this connects. So I'm going to go back to the full screen on the peg view, or I mean on the node view, sorry, and we will work on connecting a few more items, and then we'll be working with both views of the camera view and the node view so we can start setting the pivot points to make our character ready to animate. So once again, when we drag things over, the connection is what's on top, what's on bottom. So right now we have our legs. I want the hip. And so let's see, that's arm. These two are arms, these two are legs. If I click on one here, so this is now my going from my leg. So we have leg here, so I'm going to put the hip in front of the leg so it kind of covers that. And then going to have the neck and torso beneath the arms. So if we go back to the view, we can see now this is how our character is set up. So the ears are behind the head, the arms are in front of the torso for now. And then we have the hips, the legs, the feet. So we have the whole character. So now we just need to add in a few more items, because if I click on this, and one thing that's happening right now is if I click on it, it shows purple, and purple indicates that we're selecting a drawing layer. So I've selected my transform tool. This is what we animate with, but we need to select pegs when we're animating. One thing we can do is with our transform tool active, we can go into the tool properties and choose peg selection mode. So now that we can see that our character is mostly there, what we're going to do is finish connecting everything together in the node view and then work on the pivot points. So full screen twice, so Command or Control F in the node, Command or Control F again, and that brings us into this view. So now we need to set up a few more options here. So this upper body peg, I'm going to stretch it up. I'm also going to take and pull the lower body peg up. Now I'm keeping them straight up and down because I will want to set those pivot points the same. So the upper body is going to join with the headmaster. So that means if I move the upper body, the head moves with it. I also want with the upper body to move the neck, and I want to move, we'll zoom out a little bit so we can see what's there. I want to move the back arm as well. Now the lower body just moves the hips, and no, we gotta go over even further, the legs. Okay, so now I can move the lower body, which will then move both legs and the hips. I can move the upper body, which will move the head, neck, and torso and arms. If I knew I needed it or wanted it, I could have an upper body, which is the head, neck, torso, and then well, the arms always really need to move with it, so that just makes sense to have that. So now that I have these two pegs, I'm going to add one more peg in here. This will be my master peg for the character. So that's my master peg, and then that will move if I need to animate my whole character. Now I could also set up a scene peg, and this is pretty common to have a scene peg that is set specifically just to scale the character. So we could have another one. The same way that sometimes we'll set up multiple pegs, one for rotation and one for movement or translation. So we keep those things separate because sometimes we need to rotate, scale, and translate all separately. So we set up multiple pegs for a given element or group. That can give us tremendous flexibility while we're working. So right now for this one, we'll just work with a scene peg. So now we have all of our different pegs configured. I'm just going to, the headmaster and the head will share the same, so I'm keeping that organization so that I can see what is happening. With that, we can exit our full screen view. Now that I exited the full screen view, when we're working in Harmony, we can also click these little arrows to kind of collapse a window so we can make more space for ourselves. So before I do that, I do want to make sure I have peg selection mode active. I'm going to expand that out. I'm going to move this over and move this over. Well, we need to be able to, while we do this, make sure that I can see, because right here, this is the center. So let's, not that one, here. So that is the center of my camera view. And with that center, that's where every single peg, so if I click on a peg, we can see that that is where the pivot point is set. No matter where the artwork was drawn, that is where the pivot point is. So we need to move those pivot points. But when we're setting pivot points, we don't set pivot points with our transform tool, even though we can see a pivot point there and we could move it. That moves it and creates a keyframe. Instead, what we want to do, and the standard tool for doing this, is we use the advanced animation rotate tool. So the theory on using the rotate tool versus the translate tool, both actually will work, is we move the rotate tool and then we can even do a test rotation to make sure that it's moving where it's supposed to be moving from, so that it's behaving correctly. So that if we choose something like the front arm master, actually I'm just going to start with the hand first. So if I just grab the hand and I move the peg down, now I may want to move in so I can, or zoom in, not move in, so I can see where it's rotating from. And I want to be rotating from the center there, so I can now So two things happened here, and this is a good lesson to learn, is I moved the pivot point, but for the wrong hand. So we can see that hand disappeared. So if I go and try and find this hand here, it's like, where is that hand? Or where's this peg that I was working with? Well, that peg, if I want to find anything on my layers, I can hold down O on the keyboard when I'm in my timeline, and it will locate it. And we can see, okay, it put in a keyframe. Well, we don't really want a keyframe there, so keyframes on pegs, I can just hit delete, and now it goes. So I moved the wrong one. So I moved it to the wrong hand. So I need to move it to this hand. So now I can test the rotation. Like, why wasn't it working? But notice it creates a keyframe. If we don't want that keyframe, I can select it and hit delete. While we're setting pivot points, it's not a bad idea if we have animate turned on as we go to animate off. When we turn animate off, what it's going to do is it will prevent us from setting any keyframes, so we can adjust things, rotate things, do everything we need to do to get it all configured, and we don't have to worry about making sure that we didn't accidentally insert keyframes. So a couple key concepts there. One, make sure you're on the correct thing. Two, turn off animate. Turn it back on when you're ready to animate. And three, the letter O will locate something. So if I click on a layer here, so if I click on front eye, go into my node view and hit the letter O, it will now center on that selection. So we can see it found the front eye. So it's actually pretty cool that we can do that. All right, well, I mean, it really doesn't matter what layer item we start with here. So we have the front eye. So we can see there is the layer. So I'll use my rotate tool, but go to the peg here. Notice when I select artwork layer, it gets a purple color. But when I select pegs, it gives it a yellow overlay. Or if I click here, we can see how it's different. Oh, and it's red right now on the edges because animate is turned off. If we turn animate back on, we can see yellow versus kind of magenta or purple. So use these subtle clues to know what is happening in your project. So we can see yellow indicates I've selected a peg layer, and that's what we want when we're setting pivot points. Use the rotate tool, and common place to put pivot points for eyes is at the bottom, so then you can animate the eye, making it taller or wider, so it animates from the bottom for expression purposes. Now if you have a complex eye, you may not always put it there. It may be more in the center, but if you have simple drawing substitution eyes, where eyes are open and closed for different facial expressions, just putting your pivot point at the bottom or in the corner, the tear duct area on a normal kind of humanoid or animal type eye is going to be really a useful way of working. So this process right now is just simply I am dragging my different items. So I go click on that element and drag it. Now here, this is the first time we've run into one where we have two nodes. So I have two nodes here. Let me zoom in a little bit. If I select both of those nodes, now it's like, why is the mouth? I was thinking I was doing the head one, but this is now for the whole face. And the mouth, again, I'll use that same technique of put it at the bottom. I mean, I could put it at the top. Actually, I'm going to put it at the top of the lips because the upper part of the mouth is typically fixed as we open our jaw, so then it stretches down. So I'm going to just put it right there. But if I click off and now click on face, we can see that's where that node is, or pivot point is set. If I click on mouth, it's at the same thing. We can see nose, mouth, face. We can see how those are configured. Now if I go to the head here and select those two nodes, and this is why creating that vertical alignment is so critical while we do this. Now typically the head, we put our pivot points at the chin. It's a common place. The ear, I'm going to decide to put the pivot point where it joins the head approximately. That's mostly centered on the ear. Now let's work our way across. We can see we have two pegs here, upper body and torso. So if I select those, we'll just put that down at the belly button and configure that. Now if I go to the neck, I'm going to make it so that the neck bends right where it kind of joins or comes out of the torso. Hips and lower body. Now if we select those, we'll move up a little bit. And for the hips, I'm going to put it kind of, again, it's right around the belly button area. Master point, as long as I'm just kind of working my way across the scene, I'll just select that. Notice how it's selected everything here. And master points are typically centered beneath the between or beneath the feet there. So that's a common place to put our master point. Click on lower body, click on hip. So we can see how these pivot points are now set. So we have a hand, select these two for the lower arm. We center that in the elbow, select these two for the upper arm, put that in on the shoulder. Let's work our way across. Now I have the next hand, put that in elbow, shoulder. Now this character doesn't have shoulders or sleeves as part of it. In a more complex rig, then of course we would have those. We'll center this in the ankle so that the foot can pivot at the ankle. Select the two lower leg. That is now creating our knee. Go and create the hip. Go into the other foot. Set the knee. And finally we are going to set the other hip. So now I have a character that is ready to animate. So we can see here is the character composite. And if I add something else to my scene, then those layers, so even if I take my color card, remember A and D to activate or deactivate. So I'll activate it, put the color card beneath it, and now we can see we have a color card beneath my character. If I go into my scene, we are really ready to start animating. To animate with this character, make sure Animate's turned on, grab the transformation tool. I can make my node view smaller because I don't really need to see all of it. Now we may, as we work through things in the beginning here, want to just start paying attention to what's happening with our nodes when we're selecting them. But before I work one more time, make sure node selection view is active with my transform tool. So if I click on a layer, we can see that shows the upper arm. If I want to do the full arm, the letter B as in boy selects all of it. Shift B will go down that chain. So with the arm selected, if I hit B again, we can see now it shows the entire upper body. So we can, animate the character that way. So it's going to be ready to animate. But when we're doing this, it's critical that I collapse on that top level peg. I click in the first frame and I insert a keyframe for my character, and I do that using function key F6, or in my timeline I see where there's a KF and I can just simply click on that and that inserts a keyframe. Now that I've done that, I am going to move my character so that they are now on frame, and I'm going to hold down the shift key and shrink them down a little bit so that they fit within the entirety of my scene. I can now zoom in a little bit. I can even, shift M, centers it and returns it back to a standard view. I just zoomed out a little bit so I can see. I can turn on my frame if I want. Now I can move my character over here. Yeah, I don't want to be that close to the edge. So if I had a drawing or a ground layer, some background elements, foreground elements, whatever. But now I have frame 1. So now if I go to my next frame, we can see my character doesn't continue, and that's because we have not set their exposure. So I'll go just click out at the end of my timeline, and the function key F5 extends out your exposure, and now my character exists for the whole thing. So I can move to frame 2, click off my character, click on my character. If I want to now in frame 2, hit B, move the arm, B, move the arm here, B, there. So we'll see. Now, one thing to notice is it's not a solid dot, but this time now I have a white square. The white square indicates that I have only keyframed some of the elements. It's a good practice that every time you're creating a new pose, you click on that and you hit F6, so it puts a keyframe on every layer. So we get a keyframe on everything, because if I don't do that, let me collapse it, and we have it here. We can zoom, or not zoom, but work our way down, and we'll see that it only added keyframes for that one arm. And that's not necessarily, it's not end of the world when we're doing that, but typically when we're going from pose to pose animation, you want to keyframe everything, otherwise you will get some unexpected where some things move fast, some move slow. So we know we're going to completely figure out this whole pose. So I'm going to click on that leg, and now rotate, rotate, and rotate that leg there. Click here, B twice, B twice. Oh, I didn't want to stretch it. Just trying to click on the foot and I accidentally stretched it. Now, if I turn on onion skinning, we can see a little bit of where the character was. So with the whole character selected, and I can just click here. If I hit O here, we'll see indeed I am at the master peg, and I can now align my character up. So we go from pose to pose, turn off onion skinning, so we can better see how my character is moving. Now I don't have any type of tween turned on, and it's a good practice is set your poses without tweening, and you work on the basic timing between the poses. And once you have set that timing, you've worked out what you want your timing to be, like how long, and I should, once again, F6, but we try and figure out how long I want something to take. So if I want it to go down quickly or slowly, and then we're going to move over, and now I'm going to go over a few more frames, function key F6, turn on onion skinning so we can see where he left from. And turn it back off so I don't have that annoyance. So as we're doing this, it's a lot of B and Shift B as you figure things out. And I'm just working on the rough poses right now, just with rotate and translate. I may want to do some more additional skewing and stretching of things to create more dramatic poses, because that's going to give me that breakdown. But normally we work on the poses, and then as we start figuring out the breakdown in between, that's where we start distorting things a little bit more, creating some of the special poses or other, figuring out how to get from A to B or from pose A to pose B in the most engaging and creative manner. So now if I play this and watch my timing, if I'm happy with the timing, what I might do is select these frames and I can turn on motion tweening. So now we can see with the motion tweening, it smooths it out. And what I might do is grab one of those keyframes and adjust the timing, maybe slow it down a little bit if something was happening too quick. If I want it to drop much faster, so if I want him to drop quickly, so we can adjust these and figure it out. And now using where I have these two keyframes here, and I'm going to stretch. I'm going to just give myself even more time between them. If I find, so from here to here, I'm going to go find that middle part, that middle frame, insert that keyframe, make it a motion keyframe, and now what I'm doing is favoring go slow and then fast. So I'm creating that adjusting, so I can use tweening to figure out an in-between pose, but then I can move that pose so it's closer to one of my frames. So right now, if we give this more time and we go to the middle position here, F6, and skew that so it starts, so we took what was the middle part, made it quick, and then it's slow. So we're changing whether we're kind of easing in or easing out. So we're going from what was the middle, so then we make that faster. So that can be a way as we're going from our different poses to control it. So as your character has been rigged, you now have the capacity to do something fun and engaging with it. Good luck and have fun animating.